All right. What is up, everybody? We're back. Longevity Game Podcast. So, it's going to be a good one today. We're going to switch gears. We're going to do something a little different. We're going to approach longevity from a new lens. Let's put it like that. We're going to approach longevity with a new lens. And so if you don't have a piece of paper and a pen, get a piece of paper and a pen. We're going to talk about some cool things. We're going to take some deep dives in a few things. So let's go ahead and get it going. All right. What is happening, everybody? What is happening? It's, let's see, today's Monday. It's a holiday today, which means the kids are home from school. And so I got to knock this out because the kids are home. And at any moment, they're going to bust in and there's going to be loud kids, playing and talking and, having fun. So we're going to get through this quickly, but we're going to cover some really cool things. All right. So what if I told you losing weight is no longer the goal, right? I know what you're thinking. You're like, what? If I need to lose weight, that's the goal, right? Well, what if I told you that living longer is not even the goal, right? The real goal is preserving your biological systems. Now we're going to just give me your patience and go with me on this journey. Okay. Welcome back to the Longevity Game Podcast. This week, we're going to do something a little different, okay? Instead of spotlighting one molecule or one study working on one particular thing, we're going to zoom out, right, in a big way. And we're going to ask a bigger question. Where is the longevity field going right now? Because there is a shift happening. For years, the conversation was like anti-aging creams, testosterone or hormone optimization, fat loss medications, biohacks, that stuff. But now the science is really evolving, and the conversation is becoming more like systems biology, mitochondrial health, which we talk about, brain preservation, neurocognitive decline. We talk about that. Muscle as medicine, metabolic resilience, and metabolic flexibility, and so today I'm going to break that down in a way that just kind of makes sense without all the technical PhD jargon, right? And so just go with me on this and let's have a good time. All right. And if you're not following me, give me a follow. It really helps. The more people that follow or the more people that leave comments and likes and shares, the more this gets out. So if you're enjoying it, I'd invite you to please just give me a follow. And if you can give me some kind of rating, because we're on iTunes, we're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, we're on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, all the places. So if you could give me some props, man, that'd be really helpful. And I appreciate that very much. Now, I'm not trying to get famous on this thing, but I am trying to bring about health change, and I'm trying to educate people in a way that they can take this information and bring it to them, to their provider, and hopefully they can see big changes in their lives. I hope that you see big changes in your life from listening to some of this information, maybe putting one or two things, into motion, that you've seen some big changes. So I hope that's the case. Anyway, let's go. The big shift from fixing aging to preserving systems. Now, so systems, it's a little curious, right? So I think let's first simplify something. Okay. So for decades, researchers looked at aging like this: fix the broken part, or find the broken part, then fix the broken part, right? Low testosterone? No, just replace it, right? Inflammation? Block it. You got short telomeres? Well, let's lengthen, or at least try to lengthen the telomeres. But aging's not just one single broken switch, you know what I mean? It's a systems decline. It's a breakdown in more than one thing, right? So let's define that. Your body runs on several major systems, right? For mitochondrial energy production. And I'm a mitochondria guy. I love talking about the mitochondria and their importance, but they're not the only lever for longevity, right? So mitochondria energy production, immune regulation, hormone signaling, gut microbiome balance, stem cell repair capacity, and then neurological signaling. All right. As we age, those systems slowly lose efficiency, and that's something that, it's not that something breaks, it's that, communication between these systems becomes really noisy, if I could, it's tantamount to an orchestra, in your 20s, let's just say that your body is an orchestra, right? And it's synchronized in your 20s. Things are, man, they're just firing on all cylinders, man. Everything's just, really killing it. But in your 50s and your 60s, some of those instruments just start kind of drifting off tempo a little bit, And so now longevity science is asking, how do we preserve that synchronization, right? It's a completely different mindset. And so when we say longevity science is moving toward biological synchronization, I think that we probably should kind of slow that conversation down a little bit because, it makes a little bit of sense, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I'm imagining, for people who haven't read the stuff that I've read here. And so let's just slow it down. All right. So your body's not a collection of independent organs, right? Each organ is an integrated signaling device, and it's a part of a greater signaling network. Your brain talks to your gut, right? Your muscles talk to your brain. Fat tissue talks to your immune system. Immune cells talk to your mitochondria. Hormones regulate all of it. And so longevity is not about one of those systems staying strong. It's about them staying in communication, right? And so the communication is actually the synchronization. Aging is not simply like wear and tear. It is wear and tear, but it's progressive signaling noise, like Wi-Fi interference. In your 20s, signals are clear. Insulin sensitivity is high, man. Mitochondria respond quickly. Inflammation, it resolves quick, and in your 50s and your 60s, the signaling, it gets delayed. In insulin receptors, they respond way slower. Mitochondria produce more what they call ROSs, or reactive oxygen species. Inflammation lingers just a little bit longer than it should. Everything's still there, right? The systems are still in place, but they're just not communicating cleanly. They're just not firing together, synchronized, right? And so let's talk about these synchronization domains. We'll call them the 4 synchronization domains, right? Longevity science is increasingly focusing on these 4 synchronization domains. The first one is metabolic synchronization. All right. And this means, can your body switch between burning carbohydrates, burning fats, going into ketosis, responding to insulin, and responding to fasting? Young, metabolically healthy individuals shift fuel sources super easy, and that's called metabolic flexibility. But aging and metabolic disease create rigidity, right? You get stuck on glucose dependence. You lose that efficiency for fat oxidation. And then your mitochondria, they just get more and more janky, right? They lose adaptability. And so preserving synchronization here means maintaining metabolic flexibility. That's why exercise matters, guys. And that's why muscle matters. It drives metabolic efficiency. And that's also why visceral fat reduction matters, right? That's the bad fat, right? The visceral body fat, the organ fat, the most inflammatory kind, the hardest to lose. What actually drives insulin resistance as we age. Those things matter, right? The next domain is inflammatory synchronization. So inflammation in itself is not bad, right? Chronic inflammation, that's not good. That's bad. In youth, you get some inflammation, you repair, then you resolve the inflammation. That's it. But in aging, you get inflammation, you don't fully resolve it, and then low-grade chronic inflammation just persists. And you probably heard me say this time and time again, that word, inflammaging, right? Inflammation with aging, inflammaging. The first time I ever heard that word, it was on Dr. David Sinclair's book, Lifespan. And before that, I'd never heard of it. But that's what it is, chronic low-grade inflammation, inflammaging. And so synchronization here in this domain means inflammation turns on when needed, and it turns off when the repair is complete. And what can help with that? Sleep, resistance training, body composition, like the right body composition, and micronutrient sufficiency. So sufficiency, that's the opposite of inefficiency or insufficient, right? You want to make sure you're getting plenty of micronutrients. And those things can help regulate that. The next one would be mitochondrial synchronization. Domain number 3, mitochondrial synchronization. So mitochondria, they do more than make energy, right? They regulate cell survival. They regulate reactive oxygen species. As I said, as we get older, they act just a little jankier. They're cranking out more of those reactive oxygen species. But whenever they're efficient, it's really nice. You don't get as much of that. And then you also get calcium balance with mitochondria and apoptosis, which is programmed cellular death. So in youth, when you're young, damaged mitochondria are cleared efficiently. New ones are created efficiently. In that process, or those two processes, are called mitophagy and mitochondrial biogenesis. Now, mitophagy is the self-destruction of mitochondria, bad mitochondria, the cleaning of that mitochondria. And then new mitochondria is mitochondrial biogenesis. All right. So with aging, the mitophagy slows down. Mitochondrial damage just accumulates, right? Because your body's not clearing those. And then energy production becomes really, really inefficient because you have more and more mitochondria that are damaged, but they're not being cleaned out, and mitochondrial biogenesis isn't happening. So synchronization here means energy production matches demand, right? So exercise does this. Fasting does this, or time-restricted eating. Cold exposure can do this. Think cryotherapy or cold plunges. Certain peptides may assist in this, like MOTS-c, SS31. But again, lifestyle leads, right? And then number 4, the fourth domain would be neuroendocrine synchronization. And this is the communication between your brain, your hormones, your stress response, your circadian rhythm. In youth, cortisol spikes in the morning. Melatonin rises at night. Testosterone pulses predictably throughout the day, sometimes at night. Growth hormone peaks during sleep. But with aging and stress, cortisol flattens. Sleep becomes super fragmented. Your hormonal pulses, they lose amplitude, so you're not seeing as much of those spikes, and you become much less efficient, right? So longevity science is now measuring circadian rhythm stability, which is, I don't know if we've talked about some of the things that I do for my circadian rhythm. Like, first of all, it's really important to have that consistent sleep. This is a sidebar, by the way. I could just go on just so many different it takes a great amount of control to not just trail off on another topic as I'm going through this episode, because there's just so much that I want to add, but I can't make this thing super long, right? And so anyway, I have a 10,000 lumen light that I just have shine here. I'm just going to turn it on for just a second. I want you to see how bright this thing is. Oh, you know what? I actually unplugged it. So I'm not gonna mess with it. I unplugged it to plug my computer up. So anyway, it helps to reset your circadian rhythm. It's called circadian priming. You do that first thing in the morning, 10,000 lumens, for 15 minutes while you're maybe reading having some coffee, reading a paper or reading a book, or just, spending that quiet time in the mornings if you do like I do, So anyway, circadian priming, pretty cool. Anyway, back to longevity science. So it's now measuring circadian rhythm stability, right? HRV, which is heart rate variability, or the balance between your central nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. Also cortisol rhythm patterns and sleep architecture. And because synchronization here predicts resilience. And I have an Oura ring, and we've talked about that, this Oura ring right here. It tells me all those things, what my circadian rhythm is. I'm an early evening type, chronotype. And so I know when I'm supposed to sleep and when I'm supposed to wake up. The key is doing it, right? Being consistent. It also tells me what my HRV is, my heart rate variability, my average. It tells me my resilience score based on my resting my resting heart rate at night, the amount of rest that I'm getting, quality rest. It tells me if I'm getting deep sleep, REM sleep, and how much. It tells me if I'm getting light sleep. And it's just, man, I'm telling you, for resilience, which you need to know, your resilience score is really going to help you. Because if you don't know, then you don't know. But if you know what it is, you can take steps to improve it. And then you'll start feeling better. And then you'll be far more productive. And you'll be a far more fun person to be around. So just check out Oura Ring. You got to get one. I'm telling you, if you don't track it, you don't know. And if you don't know, you don't know, right? And so anyway, this is how scientists are measuring this synchronization. This is where it really gets interesting, really. So, researchers are now using epigenetic clocks, multi-omics panels. They're using something called inflammatory cytokine profiling. They're using something called metabolic flux testing and continuous glucose monitoring, HRV monitoring. Now, I can measure a few of these with my Oura ring. I haven't taken a deep dive on the multi-omics panels or the inflammatory cytokine profiling or even the metabolic flux testing, but these are things that they're looking at. And so you may be asking, well, why? Why all these things? It's because biological age isn't just about DNA damage. It's about how well systems are coordinating, right? So two people can both be 55. One person has a really high VO2 max, which is great. One of them has a very stable glucose curve, which is also great. One has a very strong grip strength, and one has very good sleep architecture, right? The other person has visceral obesity, insulin resistance. They sleep poorly. They have low muscle mass. The chronological age is the same, right? But biological synchronization is not, right? And so instead of asking, how do we reverse aging? The better question is, how do we preserve system coherence? And what that means is, how do we maintain muscle mass? How do we maintain insulin sensitivity? How do we maintain circadian rhythm integrity, right? How do we maintain mitochondrial turnover so we can get those bad mitochondria out and get new ones cranking out energy, right? How do we maintain inflammatory resolution capacity? And that's why the field's shifting, right? It's no longer about chasing one molecule. It's really about maintaining communication fidelity across systems, And so that's where we're at. All right. Let's shift into, again, one of my favorite topics is mitochondria. Let's shift to mitochondria, something called AKG, and brain longevity. All right. So most people have heard the phrase, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. Oh my God, how many times have I said that just here, on this podcast? Your mitochondria, they support energy production. They make your energy, cellular energy currency, ATP. But they also regulate oxidative stress. And that's one of the ways is how I told you that they crank out reactive oxygen species, those really janky mitochondria. But the jankier, the worse, or the more amount of those ROSs that you kick out, right? And that causes oxidative stress. So this helps to regulate oxidative stress in one way. And they influence apoptosis or cell survival. And then they control metabolic flexibility. And so when mitochondria decline, energy drops, brain fog increases, insulin resistance increases, and inflammation rises. And so here's where it gets pretty interesting. A molecule called alpha-ketoglutarate. Remember that, AKG, is gaining attention right now. AKG is really important in the Krebs cycle. It's actually a Krebs cycle intermediate, right? And it's involved in energy production, because in the Krebs cycle, we're making ATP, right? And it's a regulator of epigenetic signaling. And we've talked a lot about epigenetics here. Emerging research suggests that AKG derivatives may support mitochondrial efficiency, reduce inflammatory signaling, or potentially slow neurodegenerative processes. And this is only these are just preclinical models. All right. We're not seeing this in humans yet, but these are things that we're looking at. And so let me just break that down. So AKG helps your cells use fuel more efficiently, right? And efficient fuel use means less metabolic waste, less oxidative stress, better brain preservation. And here's the key point. AKG is not a magic pill. It works inside a larger system. Okay? But this is kind of where we're going. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Check it out. AKG. You might want to just take a deep dive into that. I find it very interesting. I like where we're going, because you can't just focus on one thing. And we're going to talk about a peptide here in a little bit, which kind of goes back to the idea of there's just more than one thing going on to slow aging, right? Or to improve health span. It's not just a magic bullet, right? Just like AKG is not a magic pill, right? There's larger systems that we have to work in. That synchronization really, really matters. So this brings us to weight loss, right? The GLP-1 era. My gosh. GLP-1s, there's just nothing like them. There's just nothing like them. I get people asking me, so I don't know, should I take this peptide or should I take this GLP-1 medication? Which all GLPs are peptides, by the way. And I'm like, well, the literature's pretty clear, which we have lots of literature on lots of these, on the semaglutide, on the tirzepatide, on the retatrutide. Man, the literature's pretty clear. There's nothing else out there that causes you to lose weight like these. Nothing. I've never seen anything. There was some phase 3 clinical trial results on retatrutide or retatrutide, however you like to say it. And they saw 28.7% of total body weight loss in the same amount of time that in a bariatric surgery patient would lose 30%. So we're talking 28.7% non-surgical, 30% surgical. I mean, it's just 1.3%, difference without all the surgery risk, and retatrutide, my gosh, amazing medication. The side effect profile is very, very low. The results are amazing. Anyway, these medications are transforming obesity treatment. And I use them, in next level TRT in my practice. But here's what people don't understand. GLP-1 medications reduce appetite. They don't build muscle. They don't automatically improve mitochondrial function, right? They don't preserve bone density. In fact, without resistance training and protein prioritization, you can lose fat, but you can also lose muscle and bone mass. And muscle loss is a longevity problem, friends. And let me explain why. Muscle is not just tissue that moves you, right? Muscle is an endocrine organ. When you contract muscle, it releases myokines. And myokines improve insulin sensitivity. They reduce inflammation. They can cross the blood-brain barrier and support cognitive function. So when you lose muscle, you lose metabolic protection, you lose brain protection, you lose longevity protection. And this is why I tell my patients, listen, if you're on a GLP-1 and you're not lifting weights, you're missing the point. Longevity weight loss is about preserving lean mass. It's about improving insulin sensitivity. It's about reducing visceral fat, the bad fat, and maintaining strength. All right, not just seeing a smaller number on the scale, right? If that's all you're chasing, it's gonna backfire on you. You've got to be lifting weights. You've got to be preserving the muscle. It's your metabolic armor. And when you start losing large amounts of that, oh man, friends, it is not going to go well with you long term. You've got to be building muscle. These medications are awesome. Like I said, they will do it. They will get you. You will achieve whatever goal you're pursuing as far as weight goes. But don't lose yourself in the process. You got to be building muscle. Don't just get hung up on that. Speaking of muscle, muscle is, they call the new anti-aging drug, right? And so let's make this extremely clear. Grip strength is one of the strongest predictors in mortality. And this is why I get a grip strength on every one of my patients. When they come in and they want to get on weight loss medication, or they want to get on a weight loss program, or if they're starting any type of peptide that will boost strength and lean muscle, or if they're looking to optimize their hormones, I always get a body composition scan, and then I get a grip strength test. And then we repeat it at 6 months and again at 12 months. And we do this because grip strength is one of the best predictors of mortality. If you have a very weak grip strength later on in life, directly correlates with an increased risk of all-cause mortality. And so lower body strength in women is associated with reduced cognitive decline. And then the risk of like neuroendocrine or neurocognitive or like Alzheimer's disease, those kind of dementia, lower body strength. Lift weights. You got to do 2 days a week. Sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle decline, increases your risk of falls. It increases your risk of hospitalization. It increases dementia risk. And like I said, it increases all-cause mortality. This directly correlates with grip strength. Grip strength is a great metric to track because it is a good representative of your overall body strength, the squeeze that you have in your hand. And so why did all this happen? Because muscle regulates glucose, it buffers inflammation, it produces neuroprotective signals, and improves vascular health. So when we talk about longevity, the conversation is shifting from how do we live longer to how do we maintain muscle, how do we maintain mitochondria, and how do we maintain metabolic flexibility? All right. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit. It's along the same lines that we're talking about. We're talking about weight loss, muscle preservation, improving your metabolism, and all those processes. Well, I want to talk about in our peptide spotlight. We do a weekly peptide spotlight. And this week we're talking about SLU 332, and this is exercise in a molecule, or is it? It's actually an exercise mimetic. That's what it's classified as. This is I think this is one direction that we're heading, right? SLU 332 is an experimental compound. All right. And it's being studied as, like I said, a potential exercise mimetic. That it's a molecule that's designed to activate some of the same pathways that the body that are activated while you exercise. And so specifically, SLUPP332 targets a receptor called ERR alpha, or estrogen related receptor alpha. So that sounds a little complicated. All right. So let's break it. Let's break this down. I don't expect you to remember all this stuff, but I'm just giving you some deeper information. So ERR alpha is involved in mitochondrial biogenesis. It's involved in fat oxidation. It's involved in muscle fiber adaptation and endurance signaling, right? And so when you perform endurance exercise, your body increases mitochondrial density, it increases oxidative metabolism, and it increases fat burning capacity, right? So SLUP332, it appears in early animal models to activate some of those same pathways. Hey, let me take a sip. You might be asking what I'm drinking here. This is actually a pre-workout because after I'm finished here, I'm going to go work out. Delicious. Okay, so in mouse studies with SLUPP332, researchers observed increased endurance capacity, right? It also saw improved metabolic markers and enhanced mitochondrial function, right? So let's slow it down though. This is preclinical. This is animal data, all right? This isn't human longevity data. We're humans. We're talking about mice, right? But the concept is really important. And so, because what it tells us is this, the future of longevity medicine isn't just about suppressing disease. It's about enhancing cellular performance, right? If you look at all the hallmarks of aging, what are they? So mitochondrial dysfunction, we've talked ad nauseum about today. Altered nutrient sensing, stem cell exhaustion, and chronic inflammation. Exercise has a positive influence on almost all of these, right? And so the scientific question becomes, can we pharmacologically activate exercise pathways? Now, here's where I want to be really clear, okay? So there is no molecule that replaces a mechanical load on a bone, neuromuscular coordination, cardiovascular strain, or hormonal response to real resistance training, right? SLUP332 does not replace squats, you know what I mean? Okay. But it does highlight something pretty powerful, right? The central role of mitochondria in longevity, right? And so where does this fit in the bigger picture? Remember earlier in this episode when we discussed AKG and mitochondrial signaling? And when we talked about muscle as an endocrine organ, and then we even talked about GLP-1s and muscle preservation, and then systems biology. Well, SLUP fits in that same narrative, right? Longevity science is converging on energy regulation, mitochondrial efficiency, and metabolic flexibility. Not just fat loss, not just optimizing hormones, and not just one biomarker. And I don't know why I have balloons flying up around me. For you guys that are listening to me, I'm using my Apple computer, and if you put up a certain hand gesture, things happen. And so I got to be very careful about my hand gestures. But apparently I did a happy birthday hand gesture or something. Hey, balloons are popping up all around. So anyway, important clinical perspective here. Let's talk about it. If a patient asks me, can I take SLUP332 instead of exercising? The answer is a simple absolutely not. Right, because exercise does more than activate ERR alpha, right? Exercise stimulates mechanotransduction in bone. It improves insulin receptor sensitivity. It enhances endothelial nitric oxide production. It releases myokines that support brain health. I mean, a molecule might mimic one pathway, right? But an exercise orchestrates dozens. And so remember also what I said earlier. Longevity is synchronization. All right, so it's just an exercise mimetic. It can help activate one or two things, but you need to lift, right? If exercise mimetics eventually prove safe and effective, though, in humans, they could potentially help individuals who are physically limited, right? People who can't squat, you know what I mean? It might support mitochondrial health in aging populations. It may assist in metabolic rehabilitation, So for now, it's just a window into where we're going, where the research is headed. And so that looks like enhancing cellular performance, not just preventing disease, right? And so you might be asking, are there any exercise mimetics that are available now? SLUPP, although it doesn't do all that other stuff, SLUPP332 does a lot of cool things, right? So is there anything people can actually use today that mimics exercise? Well, let's first define that. What does exercise do? When you exercise, you activate AMPK, which is adenine monophosphate protein activated kinase. This is an energy sensor. You activate PGC1 alpha, which is a mitochondrial biogenesis regulator. You activate mTOR, which is a muscle growth path. It's kind of like the opposite of AMPK. Myokine release. You activate insulin receptor sensitivity. You activate nitric oxide production. And then, you mechanical bone loading, that's a lot. No pill turns all those things on simultaneously. But some compounds hit pieces of the puzzle, right? And so let's break down some of the most relevant ones. The first one is a prescription, and I hear, again, Dr. David Sinclair talks about, metformin, and he takes metformin every day. He's not a diabetic and he doesn't have any insulin resistance, but he takes metformin because it's been shown to activate AMPK. It does improve insulin sensitivity, and it does enhance mitochondrial efficiency. Why people call it exercise mimetic? Well, because it activates AMPK. Metformin activates AMPK. So here's a nuance. Metformin may blunt strength training adaptations if used in certain populations. So while it improves metabolic signaling, it does not replace muscle contraction. Nothing does, right? So, it's helpful for metabolic dysfunction, but it's not a substitute for lifting weights. All right. So the next one is actually a supplement. It's called berberine. And I tell everybody about berberine. Berberine does a really great job of just lowering cholesterol levels. If you have crazy high cholesterol levels, but it does a lot of other things. It also activates AMPK. It does improve insulin sensitivity. And like I said, it improves lipid profiles. This is often referred to as nature's metformin, believe it or not. But again, it's a really great supplement. Look it up, berberine. Anybody can get it. I'm not financially incentivized, but I'll tell you a company that I know that makes good berberine, Thorne, Thorne. And they're a pharmaceutical grade, good manufacturing practice, nutritional supplement company, meaning they manufacture according to pharmaceutical GMPs. And so you get what you're hoping to get. Again, it mimics metabolic signaling, not mechanical load. All right. It doesn't cause you to contract your muscle. Right. So if someone is insulin resistant and sedentary, berberine could help, but it doesn't stimulate muscles, muscle hypertrophy. Another one, this is a peptide, and we've covered here probably 2 or 3 times. We talked about MOTS-C, MOTS-C. And so MOTS-C is awesome. It enhances mitochondrial signaling. It improves insulin sensitivity. And in animal models, it improves endurance capacity. And we talked recently about some recent human studies with MOTS-C, which was very promising. And it was talking about weight loss. I can't remember the number. I think like 15%. It was like a lot. It was good. It was really good in a certain amount of time. MOTS-C interacts with AMPK pathways and metabolic flexibility. Right, it's probably the closest thing in the peptide world to a metabolic exercise enhancer. But again, it enhances the metabolic side, not the bone loading, not the neuromuscular contraction or coordination. All right. So again, you got to lift weights. I mean, that's the big thing. Like, just lift weights. That's the pill. That's the one that you should be doing. It's easier said than done, but you don't have to go to the gym to lift weights. You can lift body weights. You can do push-ups. You can do squats. You can do tricep extensions, by using a chair. You can do, there's all kinds of things you can do. Sit-ups. You can get some bands and just use bands. Oh, here's another one. So cold exposure. This is pretty interesting. Cold exposure activates brown adipose tissue. It also improves mitochondrial density. It enhances metabolic flexibility, and it increases norepinephrine, which is similar to epinephrine or adrenaline. Cold stress does activate some overlapping pathways with endurance training, but it's still not a replacement. And it does stimulate mitochondrial adaptation, but it's still not a replacement for lifting weights. It's still good though. Creatine, which is often overlooked, really. Creatine enhances ATP recycling. It improves strength output. It supports muscle preservation, and it has a neuroprotective data that's emerging, that's showing that creatine is really great at helping prevent neurocognitive decline. And so that's still stuff that's coming down the pipe, but pretty interesting stuff. Creatine is one of the most studied supplements of all time. Again, it doesn't mimic exercise directly, but it enhances exercise capacity and it helps to preserve muscle, which is arguably it's kind of more important. And then caffeine. I know all my coffee drinkers are like, yes, right? So here's the thing. The mechanism here, it increases epinephrine. Caffeine can mobilize fatty acids, and it can enhance performance. This doesn't mean your double mocha frappuccino from Starbucks is going to do all those things, right? You just killed it, But if you're just talking about a cup of coffee, or maybe some pre-workout like I'm taking, it can improve exercise output, which indirectly enhances adaptation. Right? Okay. The reality check is here. If we compare real exercise, you get metabolic tension, stretch-mediated hypertrophy, endothelial shear stress, myokine release, neuromuscular recruitment, hormonal cascades. No compound currently gives you all that, right? The closest category we have today are AMPK activators. But AMPK activation alone is not exercise. Exercise is a full system stressor. All right, so focus on the basics and then add these other things to really just tighten everything else up, So I think that's it. I mean, we're pushing 41 minutes now, okay? So let me let you guys go. If this research excites you, here's what it should motivate you to do today. All right, 1, lift weights. 2, move daily. 3, improve metabolic flexibility. 4, support mitochondrial health with lifestyle first. Because until science produces a true exercise replacement, the barbell still wins. All right. So here's 5 actionable longevity moves this week. And let's make this practical, okay? If you want to move towards system-preserving longevity, you want to lift weights at least 3 times per week. Okay? You can commit to 3 times per week. You want to prioritize protein, 0.7 to 1 gram per pound of lean mass daily, split across all meals. You also want to walk daily, especially after meals, if you can. You want to make sure that you have consistent sleep. You want to measure your waist circumference. Visceral fat matters more than scale weight. And if you're using GLP-1 medications, add strength training, okay? Or you're sacrificing long-term resilience, okay? In closing, the future of longevity is not about chasing immortality. It's about preserving biological harmony. Muscle, mitochondria, metabolic flexibility, cognitive resilience. Longevity is not one molecule, right? It's synchronization. All right. If this is it, if this was the episode that was just a banger for you, if you really, really found this helpful, share it with somebody who needs it. If you liked what you heard, give us a follow, give us a like, a comment. Let me know. Follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. We release new conversations regularly. If you have any questions or topics you'd like for us to cover, let us know. This podcast exists to educate, not sell. I'll see you on the next episode of the Longevity Game Podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Stay intentional, stay informed, and as always, go long. If you have questions, business inquiries, or you'd like to sponsor an episode, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, just send us an email. Okay, so for questions or concerns about a topic or a particular episode, hit us up at hello@thelongevitygamepodcast.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, email us at beaguest@thelongevitygamepodcast.com. If you're interested in supporting or sponsoring the show, send us a message at sponsors@thelongevitygamepodcast.com. And that, my friends, is it. I hope you guys have a great week.